Let's close our treatment of Vergil by taking this very rich text and looking at it through some of the theoretical lenses that we've been developing in the class. Remember, we've got a whole set of ideas on myth that we've been developing in our toolbox, pulling up tools and tinkering with the myths as we go through. And also in the case of Vergil, it makes sense for us to talk about his work in terms of the early ideas of myth that we were talking about that existed among the ancients, because Vergil himself was writing as a person who is fully engaged in the ideas of myth of his time. We don't know that that's true of Homer. Probably it wasn't. We don't know that that's true of the tragedians. It probably wasn't. Maybe around the edges. But for Vergil, it's definitely the case that he is a scholar of the ideas of myth of his time, and to see him build his myth with reference to theories of myth is an interesting exercise. So we'll start there and then move on to tinkering with the story with some of our contemporary ideas. Looking at Vergil from the lens of some of the ancient ideas, we talked quite a bit in our treatment of Vergil about his rationalizing spirit. So he'll take what seem to be strange, mysterious happenings that happen in myth, the most mysterious ones, and he'll always give us multiple ways of trying to understand what's happening. So something will seem like a visitation from a god, but really it's happening inside of a dream, which we know to be a representation of a fantasy of a single person who's having some kind of vision in their sleep. He'll have the stirring up of love being sent down by a divine force that's really focused on the Dido recognizing the joy that's very present between Aeneas and his young son. So it's these aspects, I think, show Vergil in his rationalizing spirit, and we've marked those as we've run into them in our treatment of the Aeneid. Similarly, also we've marked moments where Vergil seems to be relying on allegory. We talked about that connection between Juno, the translation of the Greek goddess Hera, and her connection with the air, and that Vergil really does pretty strongly identify Juno with the air based on a scholarly precedent in those scholars that had preceded him, looking at links between the goddess Hera and the element of the air. Strong current in allegorical reading. Then also the association of Jupiter, the Greek Zeus, with the Aether, that strongly gets connected in Vergil's treatment of the topic, and those two are pretty much linked together. So now the gods are being mapped onto actual features of the cosmos in a way an allegorist might do it. We talked about Iopas's song at the close of Book 1, and how there, when Vergil gets his chance, takes his chance to represent what poetry is all about, in that same way that Homer used Demodocus to represent what poetry is about, we think. Vergil seems self-consciously to be doing that as well, knowing the scholarship that preceded him, and just like in these cases of allegory, he has Iopas sing a song about the whole structure of the cosmos. So he seems to be, again, inviting us to read his tale as a large allegory. Then also we could point to Vergil, I think, in a way that would probably be fair, as a kind of proto-functionalist. Remember what functionalists are up to. They claim that myths are there in order to legitimize certain kinds of social and cultural norms. Well, it seems pretty clear that Vergil is up to something self-consciously like that in his own story. After all, he writes during a time when Rome has a desperate need for a new sense of what it is to be Roman, some justification, some articulation, some new meaning put behind their traditional social customs. Well, Vergil seems to be onto this, and I wouldn't call him a functionalist because functionalism wasn't invented. That would be anachronistic, but he strikes me as a kind of proto-functionalist. He is fully aware of the power of myth to instill and legitimize certain kinds of social norms, and he's self-consciously doing that with his mythic storytelling in order to instill and legitimize certain senses of what it is to be Roman. Now, modern ideas on Vergil's myth are really interesting to pull out. I'm just going to scratch the surface here, literally just barely scratch the surface of a very rich set of possibilities. Surely introducing our tools and digging into our toolbox, we're going to find all kinds of wonderful things in Vergil's tale. First of all, starting off with a functionalist reading from what a contemporary functionalist might make out of Vergil's story. We've already hinted at this when we talked about one way to look at how Vergil casts the relationship between Dido and Aeneas. There we have a powerful sense of a new social and cultural value of pietas, or duty. And that comes on a collision course with an old and very traditional and very Homeric anchoring cultural value of Xenia. And there's no doubt that Vergil was well aware of how powerful Xenia was in Homer's world. And I think there's no doubt that he structured his epic in such a way as to create a collision course between these two fundamental cultural values. And he, in telling the story the way he did, made sure that pietas won that struggle. When they came to a collision course and we were forced to choose between them, it's pietas that should be the winner. It comes out ahead of Xenia. Yes, hospitality is all well and good, but duty is even better. Many times in life, these two things will not collide, but when they do, when you're forced to choose, you need to choose pietas. So it could well be that what we have here from a functionalist reading is a strong endorsement of this new central cultural value, so strong that it's made purposefully to have a collision course with and trump what might have counted as the old central cultural value in the Mediterranean. So taking off putting our functionalist tool back in our toolbox for a second and picking up another tool, let's just make a quick comment about the kind of reading that a psychoanalyst might do of this myth. Someone who wants to do psychoanalytic theory of the reading of myths. Remember, according to Freud, myths are there to dramatize the events of any individual's development of their mental or intellectual or psychological life. And dreams, this is how dreams operate. We should look at myths as the dreams of an entire culture. So myths are a culture's attempt to reflect, to dramatize the developments that they see in their own emergent collective psychological life. In the case of Rome, there are many directions we could go with this, but surely it seems pretty clear that what we have is a culture at the time Vergil's writing that is dominant across the Mediterranean, and some sense of the joy and pleasure of being top dog in the universe, married with a certain kind of guilt at what it took to get there, including figures like Dido and all the people who get chewed up in the machinery of fate as it grinds forward toward the production of Rome, and all the human suffering that, again, Vergil never turns a blind eye to. He doesn't paper over any of this. All of these things seem to be sort of built into and offloaded from, if we're pretending to be contemporary Romans for a second, they're offloaded onto these mythological characters. So our sense that, yeah, we're now top dogs in the Mediterranean universe, and we feel a little bad about being there, but look, here we are. Each of these pieces of our sense of what it is to be Roman gets offloaded onto these characters, and we get to watch Aeneas go through this whole process of acquiring and gathering power for Rome through his pietas and all the good things that he does. So dreams that we might have, fantasies that we as Romans might have of great dominance over others, these get offloaded onto an acceptable substitute, onto Aeneas, who we get to see. He's a mythic character. He's the great founder of what it is to be Rome. We get to see him executing those things. And then in the end, it helps to justify our own sense, give meaning to our own sense of where we are in the universe. Again, just scratching the surface. Finally, would want to take another possibility, put our Freudian tool back in our toolbox, and using this structuralist tool, recall that what a structuralist does is look for binary oppositions that are at the core of a myth. These binary oppositions are between two things that are important organizing elements of the experience of being human, and these two things are in conflict, and that conflict provides the voltage, that is the energy that makes the myth unfold. Okay, so if we're doing a structuralist reading, we go binary hunting. If a structuralist were to look at the Aeneid, a structuralist could propose to return to a binary opposition that we've already been developing in this class. Recall that when we looked at Athenian tragedy, and especially the Oresteia, we talked about how there was a possible structuralist binary being at work there of looking at different ways of how human societies are organized. On the one hand, we have organizing human societies via blood relations. On the other hand, the organizing of societies by voluntary associations. And in the case of this new democratic Athens, we talked about the Oresteia as underwriting this sense of voluntary associations as being a critical and important way to talk about the structuring of human society. And here they were winning out over blood relations. Voluntary associations versus blood relations, with a winning out of voluntary associations in that earlier model. Now we get to Rome and things, yeah, we could maybe use that same binary, voluntary associations versus blood relations, but here what's happening is blood relations are winning out again. So we're going back to the future. It's a renewal of a traditional way of looking at things that it seemed that the Aristotle was overturning, which says the critical organizing piece of human society is these blood relations. Think how important blood relations are in our story. We've got Aeneas. We have his connection with his father Anchises and his connection with his little young son that he's guiding by the hand, who represents the future. We have the eschewing of the connection with Dido. That voluntary association there is shown to be treacherous, and one should avoid it and stay away from it. And then as we get into the book 6 in the underworld, a strong endorsement of blood relations. Look what Anchises does. Tracks all these family trees and talks about how they're going to be the governing way that makes this future work in the larger Roman society. And the embrace now of voluntary blood relations over voluntary associations as a way of anchoring human society would be one way, I think, that a structuralist could look at this. The binary opposition here is in tension. It's not really resolved. The finger is put on the scale on one side and on the other. In classical Athens on the voluntary association side, in Rome back on the blood relations side. But we see the value and importance of both of these ideas, and the two come into conflict in our intention, is what a structuralist would do. One possible way a structuralist would read our amazing epic of Vergil's Aeneid.